we're moving into winter now, and although the water's cold, we seem to be getting milder winters. So for that reason, the bomb and pellet is still a really viable method for winning matches. You know, even when the water temperature is down to 8 degrees. Not talking about big weights, you know, sometimes you only need 50, 70 pounds to win a match. So just by steady feeding throughout the day, can take time for the bomb and pellet to start working. I've been fishing here for about an hour and I've just caught my first fish. And what we're looking at is a refined approach to bomb and pellet fishing. I'll start with the rig that I'm using today. From the hook end, I've got a lassoed pellet, and it's not an 8mm, which should probably go hand in hand with most bomb and pellet fishing, but because it's cooler, I'm using a 6mm pellet for feed and to put on the lasso as well. So starting from the lasso, so I've just caught a fish on the bomb and pellet, and one of the things that I really like to do while fishing bomb and pellet is, rather than use a band, I like to lasso it on the hair. I find that bands can deteriorate over time in the hook box. It's really good, you know, an easier way to fish, but I prefer to tie my own lassos and lasso a pellet on. So I've just caught that fish. It's been in the water a while and it's gone a bit softer. Now you can use a pellet bander to open the lasso if you like, but I prefer to just dig in with my baiting needle, get behind the actual lasso like so, and just pull it apart up to the shank of the hook, and that opens the lasso out and you can pop your pellet out and offer a nice new hard one in. Take a bit of time. I've got a bait box full of pellets there, 6mm pellets, and I'm just looking for a slightly bigger one than the general sort of size, which looks like that one to me. And when the fish are cruising on the lake, picking the odd pellet up, you know, they're not going mad this time of year. They're just looking for something out of the usual that's going to stand out to them and pick it up. So I'm just holding the pellet like this. As I say, you can put a pellet bander in there if you've got really cold hands, and that makes the job probably easier, but it's a lot less faffing about if you can manage to just do it with your fingers and just offer the lasso over the pellet like so, and just pull it down onto the pellet, and that ain't coming off. That's on there until you get a bite. Really, that could be on the lake for an hour before you get a bite, and I can reel it in and it still be on there. So, and that's you need that in your head, you know, understanding that your pellet is on your hair, because you can be waiting quite a time for bites during this time of year. So starting from the pellet end, I've lassoed my pellet on. It's a hair probably the size, twice the size as a 6mm pellet, because you need to open that out to get your next pellet in. So the way I just explain really how I tie it for a start is you want to be tying it on something like when the pellet's on the hair, you want it to be about 10mm off the hook, and then that gives you plenty of room to open the lasso out and strangle the pellet with it. So from the pellet, we've got because this is like a refined approach to bomb and pellet fishing, because we're fishing in the winter and the fish don't want lots and lots of bait now. I'm using a 6mm pellet. So for that reason, I've gone down even smaller on my hook. Normally it's an 18 when I'm fishing an 8mm, but because I'm fishing a 16, I've gone down to a KKMB, which is the same pattern that I'd be using with an 8mm, but now this is a size 20. So again, a big believer in small hooks when any fishing other than when I've got a piece of paste on, which is where I'd probably using a 10 or a 12, because I just simply lose less fish on small hooks. So I've got no worries about losing fish, and the rig line is 017 power line. I don't really go lower than that, don't matter how cold it is, for this sort of fishing in the winter, because you still need the strength. It's still a fine line, but you still need the strength because you can catch fish up to 15 pound even on a small pellet like this. So from the hook, KKMB in a 20, I've got 25 inches, which is the golden length for me when I'm bomb fishing. I don't like it any shorter, to be fair, or longer. It just becomes cumbersome. So I've got 25 inches of 017 power line, and then I've got a big loop. And the reason why I tie big loops is because they're stronger. A bigger loop is stronger than a small loop because it's stretchier, and that goes for the hook length as well. Although it's 017, it is a strong line on its own, but because it's longer, then the stretching it makes it stronger, which is all important when you're after quite big fish. So tied onto the loop, I've got a Preston method stop bead, which is the hook length is hooked onto the hook, like so. If you pull the soft rubber stopper off it, then you can take your hook off like so and put it back on like so, just by pushing the bead back over it. And then if I let this lead slide down from the rod end, I'm using a 20 gram ICS lead, which is in line, which can be pulled apart and be altered on the weight of the lead. If I'm fishing shorter, then I'd use a 15 gram, or I'm fishing right over to the island, which is really out of catapult range, so it's not going to be viable really for bomb and pellet fishing, because you need to fish at a range where you can comfortably catapult accurately with 6mm pellets, which leads me on to another thing you need to know when fishing with 6mm pellets with a bomb and pellet rig. Is it works better where the wind, if you get the wind right, it can take, it's easier to feed them more accurately. An 8mm pellet will go further and probably more accurate, but I think a lot of the time that's too big for winter fishing. So that's the reason I'm using 6mm pellets today. But because of that, I'm only fishing sort of just past the middle of the lake here on this peg, but I'm really confident catching there because they still fire out really accurately, these pellets do, but you do need like a shorter range to fish it at. A narrower end part of the lake would suit it ideally, especially if you've got a tailwind off your back. You can catapult them even near to an island, and that's what I'd advise once the water goes cold. Rather than try and use 8mm, which sometimes a lot of the time can be too big for winter carp, and I find a 6mm can work better. So I've picked a spot where I can feed my pellets accurately. I've got a nice wind coming off my back here, and I've been fishing for about an hour, and using my catapult, I'm grouping within about a 6-foot circle, I'd say, which is pretty good for bomb and pellet fishing. You don't want to be really tight, although it's hard to get tight with pellets when you're bomb and pellet fishing. But I've got a lovely bright marker there, so that's my line, that's my direction, and experience will tell you the range you're at. But a good tip, I'm just about to cast out now, and a good tip to show you here is I've got my rig all baited up, and I can just drop that in the water there with about 2 foot hanging down, so I'm ready to cast. I've got the bail arm closed, so it's I'm just going to get ready to undo the bail arm and cast as soon as I've let my catapult go after I've fed some pellets in. And that the rings from the pellets will give me the perfect distance marker to fire my bomb at. I've got my direction, I just need the distance. And whilst you're fishing, through the hours, you get a mental picture of where you need to be casting the bomb, and it is important. You need your bomb and your hook bait, obviously, where your pellets are. If you think you're a bit short, then you want to reel in and cast out again. Try and get on your pellets. Or if you're too long, then you can just quickly wind in before the bomb's sunk, and get it right on that spot what you're aiming at. So here goes. I'm firing just to get the fish going. I've been fishing about an hour. It's a slow start, which it normally is on the bomb and pellet, but I've started off feeding a bit heavier, so probably 20 pellets every 5 minutes for 15 minutes or so, and then I've dropped down to about 10 pellets every 2.5–3 minutes now. But when fishing, even in the winter, when fishing the bomb and pellet, I never put the catapult down. You know, you just want to be feeding continuously, not one after the other, but until you get a bite, then that's the time to put your catapult down and obviously wind the fish in. So, you know, it's an active way of fishing. You're trying to build a peg up for later on in the match most of the time. You can catch early, but most of the time it's a building process. So I've got about 10 pellets in my catapult, and I'm going to fire out a comfortable range, and I've put the catapult down. I'm ready to cast in. I can see the rings of the pellets of the loose feed, and I'm going to drop my bomb straight on top of that. Couldn't have been any more accurate. With bomb fishing, I find it really important to, just before the bomb hits the water, to stop the line with your finger. I'm not clipped up for bomb and pellet fishing, because a lot of it's open water fishing. You can get some right savage bites that just pull the line off your reel, and you're not going to have time to unclip. So I've just stopped the line there just as it's hit the water, and that's straightened the rig out. I've seen the pellet land further than the bomb, which is really important, and I've let it sink on a tight line and just put my rod on the rest with a tip underwater, and it's naturally buried the line. And I've clipped the bail arm open, shut rather, and just not even half a turn of the reel handle, and there's a liner there, just a slight liner, which is what you're looking at. But because my line's quite slack because I've not tightened up, rather than look at the tip for line bites, you can see the line that's going into the water, and that's more sensitive than any tip, that is. You know, and it gives you a good impression of you know, what's happening in your peg by watching your liners. So like I said earlier, it's an active way of fishing. Even when it's really cold, it's the attraction of the sound of the pellets hitting the water and them falling through the water that make the carp aware that there's a little bit of bait going in regular. And as I say, it can take time to get a bit of competition going, but you know, after an hour or two, it can come really good, this line can. But it's something that needs to be fed while if you're on your other lines earlier on in the match. It's something you need to be feeding in the early stages of the match to build it up for later. So about 10 minutes after my last fish, lovely bite, which you get on this bomb and pellet. It's so pleasing to see that rod go around 2 foot. Just steadily firing 10 or so pellets in every 4 or 5 minutes, to be fair. And really from now, I've been fishing it about an hour and a half, I think it'll just get stronger. You notice I'm fishing quite light, 0.17 with a size 20 hook, which I'm not in the slightest bit worried that I'm going to pull out because I've got a small hook on. In fact, I'd go the other way, saying that, you know, I lose less on a small hook than I would a big hook. But nevertheless, it's still important just to, you're not going to catch loads of fish now the water's gone cold, so it's worth just taking your time, try and make every fish count. If it was a decent fish, got him under control, just keep the rod low and slowly pump him in. Got the drag set if he wants to shoot off, so I'm not going to get broke that way. Just keeping the rod low until he gets into netting range, and then the razor rod, get him up on the surface, net him and put him in the keep net. As I say, that had been in about 10 minutes before I got a nice pull round, but bites can come at any time. what's important is I think your feeding needs to be regular, you know, and try and work out the time between each feed to suit the peg you're on, and your liners, if you can see liners, or the fish you're catching. But sometimes after dropping in, you know, after you've catapulted your pellets out, you chuck your bomb on the ripples that the pellets are made. As soon as the bomb hits the bottom, you can get a bite straight away. Other times you can be waiting 10-15 minutes for a bite. So it's always worth being on your guard. Probably not noticed, but the feeder arm I'm using, I've had it cut at a length so that the second ring on my rod butts up against it. So if I'm having a cup of tea or I'm not looking at my rod, which I should be doing, and I get a really vicious bite, which you can fish in this method, which makes it, you know, a really exciting method to fish, the fish can't pull your rod in, you know, without pulling your box in, to be fair. So I'd never, and the actual design of the rod rest is important. Once it's down on that rest, you know, it's trapped in, it's a high-sided rest, so it can't, the fish can't lift it up over it, which is important. It's nearly in netting range now, so I've got the rod high. I'm just waiting for it to tire out against the rod. You can probably hear the drag going now and again, just as it lunges. Well, that's a nice fish. I'm just taking my time. The rod's creaking a bit. It's a good fish, all right. He's seen a landing net, so he's having his last throws. A lovely fish. So yeah, a lovely common carp. On the finer points, the ways of fishing the bomb and pellet.
So if you've enjoyed this video and want to see plenty more like this, don't forget to subscribe to the Preston Innovations YouTube channel, completely free, and it's bound to put more fish in your net.